One of the most important things that pediatric therapists can do is build relationships with teachers and other school staff supporting the kids on their caseload. But I see a lot of people making one really key mistake that is causing tons of communication breakdowns. And so I wanted to talk about that today so that you can know what it is and know what to do instead. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help pediatric therapists and educators be better leaders so that they can make a bigger impact on the students they serve. And today I wanted to talk about building relationships, because if you are somebody who is in charge of providing specialized services for kids, whether you're in a school or whether you're in a private practice and you're working with kids in a school, then obviously it's going to be really important for you to have relationships with the other people who are supporting kids so that you can have this seamless flow of services and everybody can be on the same page. But in order for that to happen, you have to be able to build relationships. And sometimes that can be a challenge, especially when everybody's busy, everybody's focused on their thing, and we're kind of functioning in silos. And when I was in the school systems, I know that I used to make a couple key mistakes, and I used to see my colleagues doing it as well. And I see people doing this now as I'm mentoring therapists. So the thing is that if you are a therapist, so for example, in my situation, I was a speech pathologist. And so I was working with kids on skills that would support their language and literacy. A lot of the skills would support their executive functioning. And so there were many things that I would do in my sessions with kids. But in order for that to actually work, I had to get other people on board with what I was doing. And many times, in order for what I was doing to work, people in, for example, the teachers in the classrooms, it would be really beneficial for them to know what I was doing so that they could kind of, reinforce it in the classroom. And there were many times where I would attempt to approach teachers and share different things that they could be doing in the classroom. And it's not that people were defensive. It's just that I didn't necessarily see a lot of follow through and openness to what I was suggesting. And then I would go in and check and see what was going on. And a lot of times the teachers weren't necessarily doing what I recommended. And so I had to kind of get curious about why that was happening. Because a lot of times when I am mentoring therapists who are in this kind of a situation, and this doesn't just apply to SLPs, it applies to anybody who's working with kids and they want to, help kids use strategies across the board. A lot of times it's this assumption that, that it's the teacher's fault, they're not following through or whatever it is, but that's actually not the case. A lot of times it has to do more with how you're framing it and how you're approaching the situation. So here's the thing that I was doing wrong and that I see a lot of other people doing wrong as well. And basically, a lot of times the way that I was presenting the information that I wanted the teacher to do, like let's say that I had some language skills that I was working on and the teacher could be doing something to support those skills while the kids were working on reading, for example. And the way that I was presenting it, often I was focused more on what I thought was important and not necessarily what the teacher thought was important. And I wasn't drawing the connection between how the skills that I was working on were going to support what the teacher was already working on. So the way that it felt to them was, rather than, here's something that's going to help make my life easier, it was almost like they felt as if I was giving them something additional that they had to work on that was, already this other thing on their plate that's already pretty full. And so because I wasn't making that clear connection with them, and because I wasn't leading with the things that they thought were important for their kids to function in class, they weren't really open to doing it because they didn't necessarily see the connection and it felt like something extra that they had to do. Teachers are already pretty overwhelmed. So if you lead like that, it's kind of like, okay, here's this other thing that this person thinks is important, but I've got my other stuff over here that I need to work on, and I just don't have any more bandwidth to focus on that. And I think, just to give a little bit of context, how I often see this happening with some of the therapists. So I do a lot of work with supporting executive functioning in the classroom. And the thing is, and I even went to my own child's parent orientation this week, and a lot of the things that the teachers were talking about, like, I'm a person who knows that executive functioning is important. It's something that needs to be worked on across the board in a school setting. And the teachers that were in this, that were presenting and sharing what they're going to do in their classrooms, they weren't talking about executive functioning. Now, I'm seeing the things that they are saying, and I'm seeing how this applies to all the skills that they want their students to do. But that's not what they're leading with. That's not where their brain is. And so if I were to go into them and say, like, you need to be working on executive functioning with your students, that's not how I want to lead, because those aren't the things that they're seeing in their classrooms. And so if that's not the thing that's on their radar, they're going to feel like, okay, this is an extra thing. Where you can actually make a bigger impact is not by saying, here's my agenda and here's what I think is important and here's what you need to be doing in your classroom. What you need to do instead is figure out what they think is important and lead with that. Figure out what problems they're struggling with, what things that they want to get accomplished this year with their students. And then you lead with those things. And then you can kind of tie in your thing that you want to work on after, but don't lead with that, because that's not what they care about. And this is, we want to kind of shift our thinking and think about, what does this person care about? And when you go and have those conversations, what you want to think about is, how can I make this person's life easier? You don't want to frame it as, here's this extra thing you need to worry about. You want to frame it as, here's this thing that's going to take work off your plate. And I think that a lot of times when we approach these conversations as therapists, it doesn't feel like we're making their life easier. It feels like we're giving them something extra. So with executive functioning specifically, a lot of times, rather than leading with, you need to work on your students' executive functioning skills, you might want to figure out what things they're seeing in their classroom that can be tied to executive functioning. And you focus on those things. And then you can kind of lead in and be like, okay, what we're actually working on is called executive functioning. And here's how you can, how you can support your students. So in a classroom, you might see teachers make comments about how well their students are able to sit with independent work that requires multiple steps and resilience and persistence. That was a big thing that came up in the parent orientation. Actually, my stepdaughter's math teacher mentioned that he was working on resilience and, tolerance to challenging tasks, which has to do with executive functioning. So if I were going to talk to him, I would probably, lead with, all right, you mentioned that helping kids sit through problem solving for math problems and being able to sit and focus and, self-manage and self-monitor is important. And so I would start with that, which again is an executive functioning skill. So I would lead with that. Another thing that teachers probably would be mentioning is just work completion and organization with assignments, being able to attend and focus. Again, tolerance to things that are non-preferred tasks, all of those things that probably come up when you are in school. So I always encourage people to figure out when you want someone to do something for you, I mean, yes, it's for your students, but the way that it comes across is that it's for you. When you want them to do something for you, figure out what they want. Figure out how you can do something for them. I think, who was it that said, was it Zig Ziglar? I think said something like the best way to get what you want is by helping other people get what they want. So that's what's really important, especially when you're working with teachers. Teachers play a big part in kids' lives. This is a huge part of their day where they're with teachers. So that is a huge opportunity if you are a therapist to build relationships with those people. But again, you want to do it in a way that feels supportive and not, here's this other thing that you need to worry about. And, here's this thing that you're doing wrong. We don't want to present it that way. Think about what they care about, figure out what that is, lead with that, and then you can tie in whatever your agenda is that you think is important. So I actually share a little bit more about how to build relationships and how to work through these situations so that you can figure out how to leverage your resources, leverage people that are available and supporting the students on your caseload, I talk about how to build those relationships in my clinical leadership program that is actually launching in September. So I'm actually going to share the link to get on the waiting list for that program in the comments below this video. And then also I'm going to share the link to my clinical leadership manifesto that shares a little bit about why it's so important to build relationships and why that is such a key asset to making a bigger impact on your caseload. So check out those things. Again, the waiting list to the clinical leadership program, where I will be supporting clinicians through situations like this, as well as the clinical leadership manifesto. That is a written document that can talk you through some of the key concepts that can help you be a better leader and build